Stay through the winter, the rancher said. The Apache woman asked, Share a bed? The cold wind swept across the wide, empty plains, carrying with it the first whispers of winter. The rancher stood on the porch of his small wooden home, squinting against the pale morning sun that reflected off the thin frost covering the ground. The land around him was quiet, almost too quiet, except for the occasional clatter of a loose shutter or the distant sound of a coyote howling in the distance.
He pulled his coat tighter around himself, feeling the chill creep through his bones, and let out a slow, steady breath.
This was the time of year he always prepared for, the time when the snow could come suddenly, when the nights grew longer and harsher, and when the ranch could feel more like a prison than a home. He walked back inside, his boots clicking softly against the wooden floor, and looked around at the ranch. The small kitchen smelled faintly of coffee, and a kettle whistled gently on the stove. He poured himself a cup, taking the warmth into his hands before sipping slowly, savoring the moment of calm. He had lived alone here for many years, and he liked it that way. He liked the routine, the quiet, and the freedom to work at his own pace. He liked knowing that he answered to no one but himself and the land. Yet today, even as he enjoyed the silence, a small part of him felt uneasy, as though something, or someone, was about to disturb the delicate balance of his life. Hours passed. He fed the horses, checked the fences, and prepared the barn for the possibility of snow. The sky grew darker as clouds rolled in, promising the first real storm of the season. He worked steadily, almost mechanically, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the day would not end quietly. As he tightened the last latch on the barn door, a movement caught his eye. Bet. At first he thought it was just the wind playing tricks, but then he saw her.
She emerged from the edge of the tree line, walking slowly, carefully, as though she didn't know what lay ahead. She was a woman, dressed in layers of worn clothing, a shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders.
Her hair was dark and tangled, and her face bore the signs of travel. Dirt smudges, tired eyes, and a faint, cold redness on her cheeks from the winter wind. She walked with a cautious grace, one hand holding a small bundle of belongings, the other brushing aside branches that blocked her path. The rancher's heart tightened slightly. He had not expected anyone this far out in the winter, and yet here she was, unannounced, appearing like a shadow from the wilderness. He stepped down from the barn, squinting to see her more clearly. "Hey," he called, his voice steady but careful. "You need help?" The woman paused and looked at him. Her eyes, dark and observant, met his for a long moment. There was a flicker of relief, but also caution. She nodded slightly, adjusting the bundle in her arms. I need shelter," she said, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "Just for a little while, until the snow passes." The rancher studied her, measuring the truth in her words. He could see that she was tired, cold, and alone. He could also see that she was proud and wary, the kind of person who had survived by relying on herself for too long. Normally he would have hesitated. We had rules about strangers, rules he had learned over years of living alone, rules that kept him safe. But something in her presence stirred an unexpected response in him. Perhaps. Or maybe it was the simple knowledge that winter was merciless and that he could not ignore someone in need. He nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "You can stay for a while. I have space." Breaths. Don't expect luxuries. Rep. A small, almost imperceptible smile appeared on her lips. She thanked him quietly and began walking toward the house, her movements careful, but faster now that she felt the possibility of warmth. The rancher led the way, holding the door open for her. The interior smelled of wood smoke and the faint tang of horses from the barn. She stepped inside, shivering, and the rancher quickly found her a blanket from the closet. "Psst. Here," he said, handing it to her. "You'll need this." "It's cold out there." She wrapped it around herself and nodded, pulling it close. "Psst. Thank you," she whispered. Her voice carried a hint of fatigue, but also something stronger: gratitude and a flicker of trust. The rancher returned her gaze, noticing the lines of resilience etched into her face. He wondered about her story. What had brought her here, so far from any other home? Breathed slowly. He offered her a simple meal of stew, which she ate quietly, savoring each bite. Breath. Conversation was limited. Neither spoke much, each feeling the weight of the unfamiliarity between them. Still, there was a sense of understanding forming, a recognition of shared survival, of being alone in a harsh world. Brash. Outside, the wind began to howl more fiercely, rattling the windows and reminding them both that the storm was approaching. As evening fell, the rancher made a fire in the fireplace, the flames casting a warm, flickering glow across the room. He watched her settle near the hearth, her body relaxing slightly as she absorbed the heat. She glanced at him and then away, as if unsure what was appropriate to say or do in this strange, sudden arrangement. The rancher, for his part, kept busy with chores, stacking wood, checking the locks, and ensuring the animals were secure, but his attention kept drifting to her. Eventually she spoke, breaking the silence that had grown between them. "It's very cold," she said softly, her breath visible in the warm air. "I haven't been this cold in a long time." He looked at her, his eyes softened by concern. "Winter's just starting. You'll get used to it, but it won't be easy. You'll need to stay warm." A pause followed, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Breath. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked, "Share a bed?" The rancher froze. The question hung in the air, unexpected and intimate. His mind raced, not in judgment, but in consideration of what it would mean. Sharing a bed was more than a practical choice. It was a test of trust, a crossing of boundaries that both terrified and intrigued him. He studied her, noting the weariness in her posture, the vulnerability in her eyes, and the simple, human need behind her words. He cleared his throat, choosing his words carefully. "If you need warmth, yes, we'll make it work. But that's all. You rest. That's it." Relief, and a small, shy smile crossed her face. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but sincere. There was no hidden meaning in her tone, only the honest need for safety and comfort. That night, as they arranged blankets and furs by the fireplace, the rancher felt a strange mixture of emotions: responsibility, caution, and an unfamiliar sense of companionship. The wind continued to howl outside, rattling the house, but inside there was warmth, not just from the fire, but from the silent understanding that two people, strangers until now, could find a temporary haven in each other's presence. Sleep came slowly. The rancher stayed awake longer, listening to the crackle of the fire, the whisper of the wind, and the steady, quiet breathing of the woman beside him. He thought about the harshness of winter, the solitude of the land, and the unexpected twist of fate that had brought her to his doorstep. Somewhere in the quiet of that winter night he realized that survival wasn't just about enduring the cold. It was about sharing it, even with someone you didn't yet fully know. And as the snow began to fall lightly outside, dusting the ranch in white, he allowed himself a small, careful hope. Perhaps the winter would not feel so long after all. Next morning the ranch was blanketed in a thin layer of snow, making the landscape shimmer in soft whites and grays. The sun rose slowly, casting pale light over the frozen fields, and the rancher could see his breath forming clouds as he stepped outside. He pulled his coat tighter and looked toward the small cabin, wondering how the woman had slept. Last night had been quiet, but the memory of her request, the words, "share a bed," still lingered in his mind. It was not just a question of warmth. It had been a moment of trust, a gesture that revealed her vulnerability. Inside, she stirred under the blankets, careful not to disturb him. She had slept better than she expected, the fire and shared space offering a comfort she had not felt in weeks. Even so, she felt a strange tension in the air, a mixture of gratitude, hesitation, and curiosity about the man who had opened his home to her. Breaths. She was not accustomed to relying on anyone, and yet here she was, sharing a space with a stranger and feeling unexpectedly safe. Breakfast was a quiet affair. The rancher prepared a simple meal of eggs and toast, placing a plate in front of her. She ate slowly, savoring the warmth and sustenance. Conversation was minimal, but the silence was not uncomfortable. They were learning to exist in each other's presence, navigating a new routine that required patience and mutual respect. Bay. He connected his hands, moved with careful precision as she ate, or the faint smile that appeared when she looked at the animals outside. After breakfast, the rancher suggested she help him with some chores. He wanted to keep her occupied, both to help her stay warm and to ease the awkwardness of the morning. She hesitated at first, unsure if she would be welcome, but his tone was kind, patient, and encouraging. "Come on," he said, breath. "There's work to do. It'll help pass the time, and it's good to move around in this cold." They began in the barn, feeding the horses and checking their water. The woman was careful, learning quickly how to handle the animals, brushing them with gentle strokes and speaking softly to calm them. The rancher watched her, impressed by her natural understanding of animals and her quiet confidence. He found himself explaining tasks in simple, clear ways, but she caught on almost immediately, asking questions when she was unsure. Slowly, the distance between them seemed to shrink. By midday, they had finished with the barn and moved to the fences. The wind had picked up, carrying sharp flakes of snow that stung their faces. They worked side by side, hammering loose boards and reinforcing posts. The woman's hands were cold and red, but she did not complain. Occasionally, the rancher would hand her gloves or adjust her scarf, and their hands would brush briefly. Each touch, though small, sent a subtle awareness through them both, a recognition that physical closeness was no longer just necessity, but a bridge of trust. Break. During a short break, she shared stories of her Apache heritage. She spoke of the land, the traditions, and the lessons her family had taught her about survival and respect for nature. The rancher listened intently, fascinated by the depth of her knowledge and the pride in her voice. He realized that she was not just a visitor or a stranger. She carried with her a rich history, a perspective that was both different and complementary to his own life on the ranch. He found himself asking questions, wanting to understand more, and she answered freely, feeling an unusual openness. As the afternoon wore on, they returned to the cabin, exhausted but satisfied with the day's work. Breath. The snow had begun to fall more heavily, dusting the ground in deeper white layers. Inside, the fire had been stoked, filling the room with warmth and the faint smell of wood smoke. Settled near the hearth, removing wet coats and boots, and the quiet companionship returned. The woman looked at the rancher, hesitant, and finally asked, "Do you have any neighbors? Anyone who might come by?" He shook his head. "Not really. A few miles down the road, maybe. But no one comes here unless they need to. It's isolated. Quiet." She nodded thoughtfully, understanding the solitude that came with living in such a place. "It must be hard," she said softly, "to be alone, day after day." He shrugged, not used to speaking of his feelings. "It has its moments," he said. Quiet has its own comfort. But it can get lonely, especially in winter. Breaths. Her eyes softened. I know what loneliness feels like, she said. That's why I'm grateful you let me stay. It's more than I expected. The rancher felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. He nodded, choosing to remain quiet, letting the moment speak for itself. But there was a trust forming here, delicate and fragile, but real. It was not yet friendship, not yet companionship, but the seed had been planted. The evening passed slowly. They prepared a small dinner together, talking more freely now, around his occasional dry humor, and he found himself smiling in return, something he rarely did when alone. Afterward, they settled in near the fire again, listening to the wind outside. The snowstorm had intensified, rattling the windows and making the small cabin feel even more like a sanctuary.
As night fell, the woman spoke again, her voice hesitant.
I didn't expect winter to be so long, Britt. Or so harsh. He looked at her, noting the way she shivered slightly despite the fire. Winter's tough, he said. It can be cruel, but it also shows you who you can rely on. Her eyes met his, and there was an unspoken understanding. This was not just about surviving the cold. It was about finding someone who would stand by you when the world was unforgiving. She nodded slowly, feeling a connection she had not felt in years. A quiet reassurance that she was not entirely alone. The night deepened and the storm outside seemed to press closer to the cabin, as if trying to remind them of the dangers of isolation. They moved to the sleeping area, arranging blankets and furs once again. The rancher noticed her hesitation, the way she avoided eye contact, and he spoke gently. You don't have to be afraid. We're just keeping warm. That's all. Breath. She nodded, easing herself onto the bedding, grateful for the simple honesty in his words. There was no pretense, no hidden meaning, just survival and trust. The rancher lay down as well, careful to maintain boundaries, but aware of the subtle warmth that came from shared presence. Sleep came slowly, with the sound of the storm outside blending into the rhythm of quiet breathing. The rancher reflected on the day, realizing how much had changed in just a few hours. A stranger had arrived, weary and vulnerable, and now she was here, sharing his space, his fire, and even a small part of his life. The experience was unsettling, yes, but it was also stirring something long dormant in him. A sense of responsibility, of connection, and perhaps, unexpectedly, hope. The woman, in her own thoughts, felt a similar shift. She had traveled alone for so long, relying only on herself, that the act of trusting someone even cautiously felt like both a risk and a relief. She realized that she did not have to face the winter entirely alone, that warmth and care could come in human form. It was a small revelation, but significant. Throughout the night, the storm raged, but inside the cabin, there was peace. Two strangers, brought together by circumstance, began to navigate the delicate balance between solitude and connection. Each small act, sharing chores, speaking quietly, offering a blanket, or simply existing together, built the foundation for trust that would carry them through the weeks ahead. By the time dawn broke, casting soft light across the snow-covered ranch, they had settled into a quiet rhythm. Breakfast would be prepared, chores completed, and the day would unfold, but the bond that had begun to form would continue to grow. The rancher realized that survival was no longer just about enduring winter. It was about learning to rely on another person, to share burdens and warmth, and to allow a connection to take root even in the harshest conditions. And for the woman, the realization was equally profound. She had crossed a threshold, from isolation to tentative companionship, from distrust to careful trust. The storm outside remained fierce, but within the cabin, a small flame of understanding and mutual respect burned steadily, promising that the winter might not be as cold as it seemed after all. The storm had worsened overnight. By morning, the ranch was covered in thick, unbroken layers of snow. The wind whipped across the open plains, bending the bare trees and sending cold needles through every crack in the cabin. Outside, the landscape had vanished into a swirl of white, and the rancher knew that leaving the cabin today was impossible. The snowstorm was relentless, pressing against the windows as though nature itself was testing their endurance. Inside, the cabin was warm, the fire burning steadily in the hearth. The rancher had ensured that the animals in the barn were safe and fed, but now he turned his attention to the woman who had become a quiet, unexpected presence in his life. She moved near the fireplace, her dark hair falling loosely around her shoulders, and wrapped herself tighter in a blanket. The room was small, cozy, and intimate, a sharp contrast to the howling storm outside. "Looks like we're stuck here for a while," the rancher said, his voice calm but carrying a hint of concern. She nodded, her eyes meeting his. "I don't mind," she said softly. "As long as we're safe." He studied her for a moment. There was resilience in her gaze, a quiet strength that he admired, but also a vulnerability that made him cautious. He realized that the storm was more than a physical challenge. It was testing their emotional limits as well. Being confined together in this small space meant that they could no longer hide behind routines or distractions. They had to face one another, their feelings, and the fragile trust that was slowly growing between them. The morning passed slowly. They took turns preparing a small meal, keeping the fire stoked, and organizing supplies. The snow outside continued to fall, thick and relentless, leaving the rancher with little else to do but talk to her. At first, conversation was sparse, limited to practical matters, checking the fire, sharing water, or discussing the animals, but gradually the atmosphere shifted, and their discussions became more personal. "I've never stayed in a place like this," she admitted quietly, stirring the soup carefully. "It's isolating, but also peaceful in a strange way." He nodded, understanding. "It's quiet, for sure. Inspiration. Most people don't like the isolation, but I find it grounding. Gives you time to think." She smiled faintly. "Time to think can be dangerous," she said, her tone almost teasing. "You start remembering things you'd rather forget." He glanced at her, noting the subtle sadness behind her words. "Memories can be heavy," he said, "but sometimes sharing them makes them lighter." For a long while they sat in silence, the only sounds being the wind outside and the gentle crackling of the fire. The storm raged on, but within the cabin there was a growing sense of intimacy, not physical yet, but emotional. The rancher noticed how her eyes softened when she spoke of her past, how her hands trembled slightly as she recounted stories of her family, her struggles, and the long journey that had brought her here. Breath. Each story revealed more about who she was, and with each revelation, he felt his own walls beginning to crumble. By late afternoon, the storm showed no sign of slowing. Snow drifted against the cabin walls, piling higher with every gust. Supplies were adequate, but the confinement and the endless white outside made the air feel heavy. She looked toward the window, her fingers tracing the frost on the glass. "I wasn't expecting this winter," she said softly. "It's harsher than I thought." He joined her at the window, noticing the tension in her posture. "It will pass," he said. "Storms always do, but it's okay to be afraid." "You're allowed to admit it." She turned to him, her eyes wide and honest. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not just of the storm, but of being alone. And I don't know how to trust people easily." He nodded slowly, understanding the weight of her words. Trust is earned, he said, and it takes time. I won't rush you. But I'll be honest, right now, you can rely on me. That's all I can promise. Her eyes softened further, and for the first time since she arrived, she let herself lean slightly closer to him, not out of desire, but as a gesture of reliance. The rancher, noticing the subtle shift, felt a warmth in his chest. Right. This closeness, this shared vulnerability, was new to both of them. Neither had anticipated it, and yet it was undeniable. Brace. As evening fell, the wind outside intensified, howling through the cracks in the cabin walls. The fire had burned low, and the rancher added more logs, making sure the warmth persisted. They prepared a small dinner together, but conversation was subdued. Both were aware of the storm outside, and the fact that they were confined together, forced to confront emotions they had both kept hidden for a long time. After dinner, they moved to the bedding area, arranging blankets and furs as carefully as they could. The rancher noticed the way she hesitated, the slight pause in her movements. He spoke gently. You don't have to be worried. We're just keeping warm. So, that's all. She nodded, her gaze dropping to the blankets. I know, she said softly. It's just different, being this close to someone I don't know. He understood completely. I get it. It's unusual. But sometimes unusual is necessary. Night came, thick and heavy, pressing against the cabin walls. The storm outside seemed unrelenting, but inside there was a fragile comfort. They lay side by side under the shared blankets, careful to maintain boundaries yet aware of the warmth that came from proximity. Words were sparse, but the silence was filled with understanding. Finally, in the quiet, she spoke again, her voice almost a whisper. I don't usually let people in, she admitted, but I feel safer here. With you. He turned slightly to look at her, seeing the honesty and vulnerability in her eyes. And I don't usually let people in either, he said quietly. But I feel the same. You're different. Not a stranger anymore.
The admission hung in the air, delicate and sincere. Neither spoke for a moment, letting the weight of the confession settle.
It was more than words. It was a mutual recognition of trust, of connection, forged not by comfort or convenience, but by necessity and shared struggle. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside they found a stillness that contrasted sharply with the chaos of winter. The rancher noticed her trembling slightly, not from the cold, but from the emotional intensity of the moment.
He reached out carefully, placing a hand on hers.
Britt. She did not pull away. Instead, she looked at him with quiet gratitude, understanding that this small gesture carried immense reassurance. For hours they stayed like that, hands brushing, sharing warmth, and exchanging silent acknowledgement of the bond that was growing between them. Sleep eventually came, slow and heavy, but the awareness of each other remained. The storm was still outside, but it no longer felt threatening. Together they had found a shelter not just from the winter, but from loneliness, fear, and uncertainty. By morning the snow had piled higher, and the wind still howled, but both felt a subtle shift. Their trust had deepened, and the connection was undeniable. Breath. The rancher realized that survival was no longer just about enduring the winter. It was about leaning on each other, sharing strength, and allowing themselves to be seen fully, even with all their vulnerabilities. For the woman, the revelation was equally profound. Dah! She had crossed a threshold from isolation to tentative companionship, from guardedness to cautious trust. The storm remained fierce outside, but within the cabin a new warmth had taken root. A warmth born not only from fire, blankets, and shelter, but from emotional honesty, shared vulnerability, and the promise of companionship. And as they watched the wide world through frosted windows, both silently understood that the storm would eventually pass, but the connection between them would remain. It was fragile, delicate, and new, but it was real. The morning after the storm broke was unlike any the rancher had seen in years. The sky was pale blue, the sun glinting off the fresh snow that covered the ranch in a soft, sparkling blanket. The air was crisp and clean, and for the first time in days the wind had quieted to a gentle whisper. The storm that had dominated their world was over, leaving behind a hushed, serene beauty that seemed almost magical. The rancher stepped outside, boots crunching on the thick snow. He inhaled deeply, letting the cold air fill his lungs. The world felt calm, peaceful, and yet the events of the past days weighed heavily on his mind. The storm had forced them together, revealing vulnerability, trust, and emotions neither had expected. He turned back to the cabin, noticing the woman standing at the doorway. Her face was pale from the cold, but her eyes held a quiet determination, and there was a softness in her expression he had not seen before. "Morning," she said softly, her voice carrying easily in the still air. "Looks like winter finally decided to give us a break." He nodded, offering a faint smile. "It seems so. The storm's passed, but it left a lot behind." Breath, snow everywhere, fences to repair, paths to clear. She stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Breaths. "We can handle it together," she said. "After all we've been through, I think we can manage a little more work." Her words, simple as they were, carried a weight of understanding and partnership that touched him deeply. It was more than just survival. They had learned to rely on one another, and in that reliance something stronger had begun to form. The silence between them now felt comfortable, filled with trust rather than tension. They spent the morning clearing the paths, checking on the animals, and making sure the ranch was safe after the storm. Each task they undertook together was a reminder of how far they had come. Where once they had moved cautiously around one another, now they worked with quiet coordination, hands occasionally brushing, exchanging smiles and nods without words. It was as if the storm had not only cleared the snow, but also cleared a path for understanding and companionship. During a brief pause, they both stood near the fence, looking out over the wide plains that stretched beyond the ranch. The sun reflected off the snow in a dazzling display, and for a moment, both of them were silent, taking in the beauty and the calm.
"You know," she said finally, her voice thoughtful, "I wasn't sure I could trust anyone again."
But you changed that. I feel
Safe here, with you. He met her gaze, feeling warmth rise in his chest. "I feel the same," he admitted. "These past days they've been difficult, yes, but they've also shown me that having someone by your side makes even the hardest winter bearable." The honesty in their voices was a bond in itself, something neither had planned but both cherished. They had shared stories, fears, and moments of quiet connection, and now the realization settled that they had become more than just companions enduring a storm. They had become a part of each other's lives in a meaningful way. By midday, the snow had begun to melt slightly under the sun, revealing patches of the land they knew so well. The rancher decided it was time to address the chores left by the storm. Together, they worked to repair fences that had been bent or broken, clear debris, and ensure that the animals were fed and comfortable. She moved with confidence, handling the tasks with care and efficiency. He noticed how natural she seemed in the open air, how her movements reflected both strength and grace. As they worked, neighbors who had watched the storm from afar began to appear cautiously. Some came to check on the ranch, others to offer help. The couple's presence together drew quiet curiosity, but there was a new sense of respect in the eyes of those who had known the rancher as a solitary man. The woman, once a stranger, was now part of the rhythm of the ranch, her actions and courage earning quiet admiration. After the work was done, they returned to the cabin. The fire had been tended, and the warmth welcomed them back. They shared a meal, laughter flowing more easily than it had in weeks. The tension that had once hovered between them was gone, replaced by a comfortable companionship, a silent understanding that they had endured and grown stronger together. Brett. As evening approached, the rancher and the woman sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The snow reflected the last light of the day, casting a soft glow over the land. Neither spoke for a long time, content simply to share the moment. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with unspoken acknowledgement of trust, connection, and something deeper yet to be defined. Finally, she turned to him, her voice quiet but firm.
I've been thinking, she said, about leaving when winter ended.
Breath.
About returning to my community, but I don't want to leave.
Not yet. He looked at her, understanding the depth of her words. Breath. I feel the same, he admitted. This place and this life is better with you in it. I don't want to be alone anymore either. The honesty between them was a quiet miracle, formed from shared hardship and vulnerability. They leaned closer, hands brushing naturally, the warmth of human contact more comforting than any fire. There was no rush, no pressure, just the gentle recognition of what had grown between them. That night they arranged blankets and furs once more, this time with a sense of ease and intimacy that had been absent in the first weeks. They spoke softly about their hopes, dreams, and plans for the future. She shared her desire to continue living on the ranch, learning more about the land and contributing to its care. He admitted that he had once feared companionship, but now he could not imagine facing life without her presence. The storm had tested them, but it had also revealed their capacity for trust and love. In the quiet hours of the night, they held hands, exchanged small smiles, and allowed themselves to feel the comfort of being understood and accepted. The fear of vulnerability had faded, replaced by a bond that was steady, reliable, and filled with quiet joy. Morning came again, with sunlight reflecting off the softening snow. The ranch was alive with possibility. The couple moved about the property together, checking fences, feeding animals, and preparing for the coming spring. There was laughter in their voices, easy conversation, and a mutual sense of purpose. The woman had become an inseparable part of the ranch, and the rancher felt a profound sense of relief and gratitude. By midday, neighbors who had once whispered now approached openly, offering assistance and congratulations. The rancher and the woman responded with quiet smiles and thanks, knowing that the respect earned was a testament not only to their survival, but to the strength of their partnership. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they stood side by side, hands brushing gently. The wind was soft now, carrying the faint scent of melting snow and new beginnings. They looked at the land, the ranch, and each other, and in that moment they understood something fundamental. Winter had ended, storms had passed, and they had found warmth, trust, and love in each other. No words were necessary. Their presence, their care, and the quiet strength of their bond said everything. They had survived together, endured together, and now, in the calm after the storm, they could look forward to the future. Together. The rancher finally spoke, his voice low but steady.
We made it through winter, he said.
And we'll face whatever comes next, together. She smiled, leaning slightly closer.
Yes,
she said, together. The sun dipped fully below the horizon, leaving the world bathed in twilight. The cabin glowed softly from within, a symbol of warmth, trust, and new beginnings. Outside, the snow glistened and melted slowly, marking the end of a long, harsh winter and the start of something brighter. Inside, two people, once strangers, now shared a bond forged in the cold, strengthened by hardship, and as night fell fully they sat together, watching the stars appear one by one, knowing that the winter had passed, but the connection between them would remain, steady, enduring, and filled with the quiet promise of companionship, love, and hope for all seasons to come.